Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. This project, I was just telling Bill how at that time this was just the type of research I wanted to do, and it was lovely to have that opportunity. I started this research when I was a researcher at Iowa State University, and then completed the work when I was at Minnesota State in August 2020. There was a resident PI, Caitlin Frisman, who helped with the arrangement of things in that move, and my PhD student still working at Iowa State, Ahmet Al-Bughdadi, also helped with the analysis. Brief view of what we will discuss. I have a quick intro, note on literature review, but just listening to everyone over the last kind of 2 days and talking about bridge preservation, I want to also talk about why this research or why this type of research we need at this time. I want to also acknowledge agency practice and the help we've gotten on this project from Midwest States. Kind of technical, but not too technical part of the presentation is the treatment efficiency analysis and how we looked at life cycle for DECs in Wisconsin. So when we started this research, Wisconsin DOT had a solid objective of just making this data-driven and based custom to Wisconsin and what they have done. So unlike some of the earlier studies where we did not have the treatment history maybe that much or organized condition, we really wanted to look at it exactly what does the data tell us? Not what we think, how we think DECs perform, but what exactly do we see from the data? We also wanted to see what are some of the policies that make sense when we look at the data, and can Wisconsin DOT do some of the things a little bit differently? Can we find maybe strategies based on data that could improve the life cycle costs for Wisconsin DECs? I will not go over the literature review, but I just want to plug in, it is done, it is in the report, and I put a link here for everyone. So that's going to be in the slides. But what I want to talk about most this morning is PR, bridge preservation PR. I think we need to do a better job for bridge preservation in terms of PR, and it lands on all of our shoulders. So when we think about asset management and preservation, going back to early 2000, and we could even say with the start of 1970 National Bridge Inspection Program, it was kind of seeds of asset management. Back then, we did not have the data. We didn't collect data on the work we have done, right? So we did expert elucidation on the models that we wanted to use when we wanted to look at programming. What is the most cost-effective thing to do? I think it's around maybe late 2000s where it gets serious about the data collection by the agencies on the work that they have been doing. I think after 2010, and particularly after 2012, MWBPP and the requirements of developing a transportation asset management plan, and we need to use decision support tools and bridge management systems, that we now are realizing the need for the data-driven models, because we want confidence in these models so that we can use them in the plans and in our work. I was taking notes as Chris was presenting yesterday, and with his experience, all these notes about carve-out preservation funds, collect and use the data. I think all of these things that we are now talking more and more about compared to maybe the Minneapolis conference or when we were in Bismarck. Yesterday, Sarah Sandak from Minnesota talked about element condition data-driven performance measures for preservation. Natasha Butler talked about the same thing from Colorado DOT. I think these are all very critical, and this type of data-driven research helps with that. In the report, we also have a survey, results from agencies and what they have been doing, some decision trees. I would like to also encourage you to have a look at that and thank everyone who took the time to provide survey answers and work with us on this. Let's look at the data analysis now. We said, okay, lots of data to use. We know we have the MBI condition data, and I will talk about element condition data in a minute. And we have the treatment data. We can look at how the treatment data impacted the condition over time. We also explored how maybe de-icer usage impacts, because we know salt doesn't help us. So, and also traffic, the used roadways, how do we see performance change with more traffic? We said, okay, when we look at the data in this way, and this is something I will refer to throughout the analysis, so time in state, a common kind of deterioration model term, but here I want you to think about how many years a DEC spent in a particular MBI condition rating. So those are what we call in this research our observations. Did it stay 8 years in condition 7, so then that time in state is 8, 10 years in that condition, then it would be 10. So we basically categorize all these observations into untreated, then sealed. So these are all DEC, right? Was there an overlay? Was there a seal and an overlay? Because these are all different treatment combinations, and theoretically they would have different impacts on the DECs. First, we looked at how does one treatment impact the TIS in a general condition rating. So when I say treatments and TIS, so we're looking at one of the yellow bars only. So for this one, for example, the stars are, there was a sealing, DEC seal on this one. And then prior to DEC becoming 8, there was a concrete overlay. So for this one, there was maybe two overlays and a seal, so that's what we are looking at. Also, we wanted to see, okay, it's nice to look at how 1 or 2 treatments impacted one rating, but what happens when we do multiple of those over time? It should not be the same. Also, how do these external factors such as traffic and salt, how do they impact? So we said, okay, then we look at just one treatment or multiple treatments from one TIS that would be rating level, and we look at combinations of treatments over DEC life cycle, then it would be bridge level. We wanted to also do the same analysis for Minnesota and South Dakota. However, when we got really into the data processing, we realized that we would not do justice because processing really took time, and gathering data from the districts took a lot of time. The summaries on what we could do for their data is also in the report. And we really wanted to look at element condition data. However, as you all know, when we did that, we had that shift in the data from 5 condition states, we shifted to 4 condition states, and we completely changed the methodology of element condition data. That creates a kind of this anomaly in the data set where we were getting very unrealistic results, and honestly, we didn't want to put in the report and do anything misguiding. This is something we see, unfortunately, where if we don't have enough numbers of observations for lower condition states, we get really high TIS values. That's why it's the insufficient number of observations that leads to that observation. We gathered data from all MBI history. We worked with InfoBridge a lot. So the data we looked at is from 1992 to 2017. Also gathered data on the work history from the Highway Structures Information Systems, Wisconsin State database. This took a lot of time because the treatment data at the districts were everybody collected a little bit differently. So they located the data. We need to kind of track people. If you ever needed data from anyone, you know how this works. So that took a little bit time. Then we also captured traffic, storm reports to look at all these external factors we wanted to look at, also the AVL data for the ICER. So we had almost 5,000 structures. We used this application to grab those TIS, time in state, time condition ratings, and we layered the treatment data on top of that to associate the relevant ratings and treatments and the time and state observations. We, however, noticed that, so what we knew is we did not have all of the work history. So how do we manage that? Because if we assume, if we cannot link to some of the bridges any work, but if we see MBI increases. So something was done, there was just no record of it. So the data processing was done. Okay, let's look at closely. So we also looked at geospatially. If we didn't have any work history, but we were seeing increases in that area, so then we needed to exclude that data, not to create biased estimates. So, and we found those places where we had those increases in the ratings where we did not have maybe complete work history. So we started with kind of this set of Wisconsin treatments, and in the end we kind of said, okay, these are the major treatments, the overlays we will look at. We will look at Adexil, and then all of these we will say are new decks. Big figures, so what we tried to do here is, we said, okay, when we look at the entire history for all of the decks we have in the data set, what treatment combinations are we seeing most often? Because those are the ones that we can confidently talk about and give estimates of. And then we looked at, okay, which overlay is applied when? For which MBI condition ratings? And then what type of changes did they lead to? How many jumps in MBI condition rating? How much extension in time in each rating? So then we said, okay, the most common before and after treatment GCRs by treatments are in this way. So we said, okay, typically from 4, 5, 6, that could be a new deck. It could be a rehab project where deck was replaced, new bridge. Typically, HMA overlay was applied when deck was a 5 or a 6, epoxy was when it's 6 or a 7, and so on. So we first identified all these cases that were most common in the data. And we said, okay, let's use these as building blocks for what we called life cycle profiles. I also want to discuss something critical for this type of data analysis for anybody who's interested. You might be doing it yourself, or you might have a researcher doing it for you. Although we have a lot of data, bridges have a long life, and we cannot still capture with the histories that we have. We are only able to capture maybe the last 25, 30 years of bridge lives, or the earlier, or somewhere in the middle, depending on the bridge ages, right? So when you look at the start of data, it's very critical to say, okay, in which area am I not able to capture complete time in state observations? So there's this censoring phenomenon that I think is critical, and it also needs to be reflected on the processing. For GCR9, so then we also looked at by rating what we are observing. So obviously typically new decks, and then we did not see any treatments, obviously, but there were impacts of the ceiling that we captured here. For rating 8, so for this one, we were able to capture the impact of traffic on ceiling. And we then, right now, in their Wisconsin deck preservation policy, they have, okay, every 3 to 5 years. And we said, maybe tailor that to the traffic ranges, because there's a significant relationship. So we made suggestions on the traffic thresholds, and maybe the frequency could be tailored to that. For each rating, there were some overlays that performed better, but we also, in the report, made a distinction. For some of these overlays, such as the HMA and PMA overlays, we did not have a lot of observations, so then we were not as confident in our estimations. So this should not be taken as, okay, for that rating, that overlay always performed better, because we had limited data. So, for example, for GCR6, again, HMA overlays performed better, but we had high standard deviations, so it's not as if we can say only do that for that particular rating. In terms of external variables, we looked at the ISER usage, but frankly, I found this data to be too granular, and you would hardly hear an analyst say that. It is very difficult to capture the kind of one value over the, let's say, 10 years, a deck stayed in 8. To get the salt usage from AVL data, it's not easy. We don't have all the history. So we had better luck looking at snowfall, I think, and we were able to capture them in the particular year range we were looking for those observations, but nothing too significant. We found that traffic had a more significant impact. We were able to capture that, as I mentioned, for the seals. And then we summarized, all of that effort. The appendix has a lot of information on, okay, concrete overlay deck that took a deck from a 6 to 7. But then maybe there was another overlay. For those multiple instances, we also have additional TIS observations that were noted in the appendix. So all of these, we said, okay, these are our building blocks. Now let's look at life cycles and engineering economics. Based on these most common cases of when something was overlaid or sealed, we had these ranges of TIS. Okay, let's say if you do a seal for a deck at 8, let's say it stays there for 6 years on average, and you have a standard deviation. So all of those we built into this Monte Carlo simulation. We also used the work costs. So all of these ranges are presented in appendix. I'm going to give you, so these are some of the cases we have looked. I'm going to give you an example to explain how we approach this. So this is an example where epoxy overlay was applied when the rating was 7. It took it to an 8, okay? This is the first 8 when there was no treatment. Average stayed 5 years, and this is our standard deviation for everything we captured in this data set. So we define these upper and lower values of where, for the network, these values could change. But this is the 8 after the overlay, and for those ratings of 8 after an overlay, we had all these different values that we captured. As you see, there's a higher time in state in that rating and a standard deviation. So we took all of that information and put it into spreadsheets for all of the cases we have looked to build these life cycle plans. Basically, we calculate this equivalent uniform annual costs based on the variability. It was surprising to me how quickly the simulation converged. I did 500 runs. Basically, you are varying these time in state values for all these kind of theoretic decks, but they were captured in the data, right? And after 200 runs, they converged to one value pretty quickly. So then we also have done all of these profiles and captured these costs, the costs that converged. The most important finding in all of these was the fact that with a very remarkable difference, the do nothing was in all cases the highest overall life cycle cost. So this is something we always discussed in the bridge management and preservation communities. How do we put a dollar value on preservation? We really can do it if we look at the data and we put together some analysis. And no surprise, treating decks as early as possible in their life cycles leads to lower life cycle costs. So we had quite a few suggestions because there were things we wanted to look at, especially in contrasting the overlays, but we still need more data. And Wisconsin DOT continuing to collect this data will help them to better adjust these values moving forward. All of these spreadsheets were submitted to them. I got great help from the engineers. Bill Oliver is in the room, but also Flip Meinel and Ryan Bowers guided me greatly in this research. One thing I also, this is about life cycle cost, right? So within the temps and as agencies in your overall vision for your bridges, you may also have performance requirements. So let's say on NHS you want to keep your decks on a particular rating level. So then use this type of research that also needs to be brought in, because this is what we have done was purely on what is the lowest life cycle cost. But then if you have performance requirements for different road classifications and so on, that needs to also be captured. Overall, case 9, we're sealing a deck at rating 8, then at rating 7, followed by tooth and polymer overlays, and a concrete overlay, and later seal. So this was kind of the best life cycle cost. There were quite a few things that they were debating to do. We captured those and reported. I mean, although data was limited in some areas, we were really glad to be able to capture and put a number on deck preservation in this research for Wisconsin decks. So that's my presentation and this research. Again, thanks to Bill and Wisconsin DOT. It was lovely to work on this research, and I can take any questions.
Information, Basak, but I think we talked about this before, twofold. Wisconsin doesn't consider the bottom of the bridge deck as far as condition rating of the deck. Is that correct? Like inspecting the bottom of the deck. Do they inspect it? Like some states consider the bottom of the deck, the condition state, as a component of the total condition state of the deck. And my thought process is if you have a new overlay, any overlay, and the condition of the deck itself under that overlay is in poor condition, is there some particular way in which the inspectors would consider that as part of the condition? Like what's really happening under the overlay?
Since it's inspection, that's not my expertise, but I'm going to hand it to Bill. I'm going to put him on the spot.
We do include the bottom of the deck in assessing the condition of the overall bridge deck, so it is part of the evaluation.
Does Wisconsin have a standard approach for when you apply an overlay, what the result is? In other words, if you apply
No. So that was one challenge in the study when we looked, okay, there is variability. And when I had these questions for them when we first looked at the deck, okay, when does a 6, sometimes it's a 6 is an 8 and after the overlay, and sometimes it's a 7. And they explained it just very depended on where the deck was exactly and then how it occurred. So we said, okay, let's take it as it is, as let's say, we see 200 cases where 6 becomes an 8, and then 100 cases where 6 is a 7. So that's why we look at that variability to hopefully capture all of that. Ideally, if there's a standard, right, that makes it easier for the analyst and for the agency to have a consistent way of delivering.
I have a question that's kind of like a subset of what Greg was asking. Back for decks with a general condition rating of 6, the hot mix asphalt overlay came out best. Do you think there was some bias in there because you couldn't see the deck anymore? Although Bill said they do inspect it. Yeah, so I just curious.
That might as well be the case, but one thing that for HMA overlays, we didn't want to sound very, final on that particular result was that we had so few of them compared to concrete overlays. It didn't make sense to contrast and make a call like that. That's where we kind of shied away. The variability is also very high with them. So maybe that's part of it.
Thank you, Basak.
Thank you.
Great job.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.